Suzanne Collins really said generational trauma. There's so much hidden pain and symbolism in District 12's family lines, and the Covey ties run deep.
No, my people are Covey. We're like a family.
But now you're District 12.
You say so.
This is all based on book canon, and there are spoilers for Sunrise on the Reaping. Let's dive in. Here's what we're working with. Our Covey family tree District 12 web. The Covey was originally made of a bunch of families, but in District 12 we had the Bairds, the Clades, and the lost soul Tam Amber. There are 3 Bairds, and they're all cousins. There's Lucy Gray, Maud Ivory, and Barb Azure. So they all had different parents. Here's how we're talking about dates here. So I'm going by years of the Hunger Games. So 50 HG is the year of the 50th Hunger Games, and 50 BHG is 50 years before the Hunger Games. So that's during the Dark Days era. So there's our date system. Starting off with Lucy Gray. So she was born 6 BHG and disappeared 10 HG at age 16. Her fate canonically is a mystery. We don't know what happens to her. I personally think she died in the woods, but if she somehow survived and made it back to 12 and was able to live there without being arrested and gave birth to Lenore Dove, she would have been 40 years old at the time. So it's plausible age-wise, but remember, Lucy Gray was a fugitive. Like, the mayor wanted her dead. She couldn't go back there. Lucy Gray was an orphan. She also had 2 older siblings who were deceased. We have Barb Azure Baird. She's described as a young woman around the 10th Games. So let's say she was 20 years old. Born 10 BHG. Barb Azure was queer. She was dating a woman. Of course, that doesn't mean it was impossible for her to be a mom. She could have also been into men, had a lavender marriage situation. But if we're saying she was 20 years old at the 10th Games, then she would be 44 at the time Lenore Dove was born, and Burdock Everdeen. Since people in District 12 had kids young, it's possible she was Burdock's grandmother. Let's say she had a daughter when she was 22, and then that daughter could have married an Everdeen and had Burdock when she was 22, 34 HG. So it's very plausible Barb Azure is that Covey connection to the Everdeens. The third Baird cousin is Maud Ivory. She was born around 1 or 2 HG, unknown when she died. But if she was Lenore Dove's mom, she'd have been around 32 or 33 years old at the time of her birth, and she died during childbirth. I personally think Maud Ivory is Lenore Dove's mother. I feel like it makes the most sense. Lenore Dove lived 34 HG to 50 HG. She, of course, died from poisoned gumdrops, and she was only 16 years old at the time. And she was the eternal girlfriend to Haymitch Abernathy. So he gets a little dotted line connection to her. They weren't officially married, but I feel like in his head, they're eternal partners. Her mother died during childbirth, and her pa's a mystery, but he might be from the Chance family. I'll get to that in a moment. Tam Amber was born around the same time as Lucy Gray, and he became an adoptive uncle to Lenore Dove. He helped raise her. There are 2 Clade men. We have Billy Tope Clade and Clerk Carmine Clade. Billy Tope dated Lucy Gray for a time. We don't know his exact age. I'm saying he was about 18. So let's say he lived 8 BHG to 10 HG. Clerk Carmine Clade, we don't know his exact age. Let's say he was born around 2 BHG and died sometime after the 75th Games. He made it to District 13. He was the fiddle player at Annie and Finnick's wedding. He's not officially named in Mockingjay, but Suzanne Collins confirmed the fiddle player was Clerk Carmine. He was the last Covey member standing. He was also a queer character. He had a male partner, and he was also the adoptive uncle to Lenore Dove. So Tam Amber and Clerk Carmine raised her. On to the Everdeen family. Continuing with the theory that Barb Azure is Burdock's grandma, Barb had a daughter with someone. That daughter married an Everdeen, and they were Burdock's parents. Burdock lived 34 HG and then died January 70 HG. He was 35 years old at the time of death, and he died in a coal mine explosion. It said he had distant Covey cousins on his mother's side, and Burdock went on to marry Astrid March. It seems that she was the same age as him, and then we don't know when she died. Burdock and Astrid had Katniss and Primrose. Katniss was born May 8th, 58 HG, and we don't know when she died. Primrose was born late May, 62 HG. She was only 13 years old when she died at the bombing at the Capitol after the 75th Games. So 100% confirmed, Katniss and Prim had Covey ancestry. And my theory was Barb Azure was Katniss's great-grandmother. On to the Mellark family. Katniss married Peeta Mellark, and together they had a son and a daughter. I also know people are going to say, their names are Willow and Rye, or whatever. Those are from fan fiction. We don't know their real names, I promise you. But in the Mellark family, we had Otho Mellark. It seems that he was the same age as Burdock and Astrid and Haymitch and all them, so he's born 34 HG and then died 75 HG in the bombing of District 12. And his parents owned the bakery. Otho married an unnamed Mrs. Mellark. We don't know how old she was, but she also died in the District 12 bombing. They had 3 sons, the eldest, the middle, and Peeta. And since he's the youngest brother, he's the baby of the family, he is, for a fact, baby girl. Their ages are estimated. We're just going off of Peeta's reaping ceremony. Like, his eldest brother had aged out of it, and the middle son was still old enough to volunteer. So he was either 17 or 18 at the 74th games. They both died in the Capitol bombing along with their parents. We don't know their names canonically. I know everyone's gonna comment, no, their names were XYZ. I promise you, it is fan fiction. There's no Millet or Pumpernickel or whatever. Their names are not in the books. On to the Abernathy family. So we had Mama Abernathy. Don't know when she was born, and she died sometime before year 50. She was married to Papa Abernathy, and they had a son. We don't know his name. He is Haymitch's dad, and he died sometime after 39 HG in a coal mine fire, but he was married to Willa May Abernathy, and they had several children together. She lived 15 to 50 HG and died in a house fire set by the Capitol. She was only 35 years old when she died, but she had 4 children, Haymitch, Sid, and 2 twin girls who didn't survive after they were born. Haymitch was born July 4th, 34 HG, death unknown, and his younger brother Sid Abernathy, 38 to 50 HG in that same fire, along with Willa May, who was only 12 years old. And these 2 twin girls, they were born prematurely and sadly didn't survive. Haymitch was roughly 5 years old when they were born. On to the Chance family, who may be related to Lenore Dove paternally. Arlo Chance, who died shortly after the 10th games. He was hung for rebel activity in the mines, and he's one of the people who inspired Lucy Gray to write the Hanging Tree song. Arlo's lover was named Lil. She was arrested at Arlo's hanging. He told his love to flee, and she was hung because there was a rebel plot to jailbreak her. Lil's brother, Spruce, also died shortly after the 10th games because he was helping to plot Lil's escape, and he shot and killed Billy Tope Clade. And before Spruce was hung, he hid the gun he used to shoot him and the gun Snow used to shoot Mayfair, and he hid them in that cabin by the lake. And Snow found them and turned on Lucy Gray and all of that. Also, that same cabin is where Lenore Dove and Haymitch went and had a very special birthday together one time. And Mr. Everdeen brought Katniss there. She really loved that house on the lake. There was also Clay Chance. We don't know exactly how he was related to Arlo. He died the winter of 46 HG. He was hung for an unknown crime. Lenore Dove had sabotaged his execution by damaging the rope they were going to use. The rope snapped, and then peacekeepers shot Clay. Lenore Dove's involvement in this is one of the reasons why I think she's related to the Chances. She'd also jumped in the Woodbine Chance situation. She seemed close with that family. Clay had a sister named Binny who died shortly after him. She basically volunteered to take the fall for what Lenore Dove did. She was arrested. She already had a heart condition and was going to die shortly, and she ended up dying in her cell at the Peacekeeper base. The last Chance we know by name was Woodbine Chance, and he was shot at the reaping of the 50th Hunger Games. His name was called, he fled, he was shot. We don't know how exactly he's related to Clay or Arlo. Woodbine had older brothers and a mother who was there when he was shot. On to the Donner family. So they're not related to the Covey, but they're connected because they had some Covey artifacts. Stay with me here. We had Mr. Donner, Mrs. Donner. They had 2 daughters, Maisie and Marilee. They were twins. Maisie lived 34 to 50 HG. She died in the second quarter quell when she was only 16 years old. She was attacked by pink birds. Marilee died 75 HG in the bombing of District 12, along with her family. So she was married to Mayor Undersea, and they had 1 daughter, Madge, who was Katniss's friend, and gave her the Mockingjay pin, which was created by Covey member Tam Amber. I'll get to the Covey artifacts in a bit. It's major. Skipping over the Hawthorne family because they're not really connected to the Covey, except that Gale was friends with Katniss, and he played a big role in Prim's death. Came up with the bombs that killed her. Anyway, not talking about war crime apologist Gale. Real quick hear about the Hawthorns. Mr. Hawthorne died in that same coal mine explosion as Burdock Everdeen. He was married to Hazel. She and her 4 kids all made it out to District 13. The eldest was Gail, then Rory, Vic, and then Posey. We don't know where they went after the war, but they all seemed like really great people except for Gail. So that is our Covey family tree web. So tell me, who do you think Lenore Dove's mom is? And how do you think Burdock is related to the Covey? Do you agree with me? Do you think something different? Let me know in the comments. On to the Covey artifact links. These were all made by Tam Amber. Haymitch described him as the best hand forger in District 12. He's the go-to blacksmith for new gadgets or broken parts for old machines. He's responsible for 4 artifacts: the Hummingbird pin, the Mockingjay pin, the Flint striker, and arrow tips. Starting with the Hummingbird pin. The Hummingbird pin was gold, originally owned by Grandma Donner around year 20. The pin's next owner was Mr. Donner, who gifted it to his daughter Marilee at her 13th birthday, and he gifted Maisie the Mockingjay pin. This Hummingbird pin is very interesting. There's a lot to unpack here. Marilee quickly lost it. She dropped it down a well, and the only other time hummingbirds are mentioned was underground in District 13, down the well, underground. Whoa. If you want to know more about the significance of the hummingbirds, just wait. I'll come back to this after running through the other artifacts. On to the Mockingjay pin. This was paired with the hummingbird pin. It was gold. It was owned by Grandma Donner, passed to Mr. Donner, gifted to Maisie Donner on her 13th birthday. Maisie did not like it. She wanted Tam Amber to melt it and remake it into a butterfly, but he said no, and she just threw it in the back of a drawer and never wore it. Presumably, Marilee got possession of the pin after Maisie died, and then gave it to her daughter, Madge. Madge knew it had belonged to her Aunt Maisie, and of course, she gave the pin to Katniss at the 74th Reaping. It was Katniss's token in the 74th and the 75th games. It became a huge symbol of the rebellion and gave Katniss her Mockingjay title. We know all about the pin. On to the Flint striker. This was a 16th birthday gift from Lenore Dove to Haymitch. It was his token in the 50th games. You could strike it with certain rocks to start a fire. Lenore Dove traded eggs for the metal to make it and helped Tam Amber design it. It was U-shaped with a long-necked bird on one end and a hissing snake on the other. I'm pretty certain it was never explicitly said that this was supposed to be a Mockingjay, but most likely it is one, and it had an inscription from Lenore Dove: 4H, I love you like all fire, LD. Sad. Next up, arrow tips. Burdock had a dozen of these arrow tips, and he must have attached them to make arrows, and then he passed these down to Katniss. Tam Amber made these arrowheads that helped feed the Everdeens for generations. Back to the hummingbirds. So the significance of hummingbirds in the Hunger Games. Besides the pin, the only other mention of them in the series is in Mockingjay. They were being studied in an underground meadow in District 13. Katniss and Gail go meet Peeta there shortly after she agreed to be the Mockingjay. Peeta explains why they had hummingbirds. 13 has been studying their aerodynamics here for years. Forward and backward flight and speeds up to 60 miles per hour. If only I could build you wings like these, Katniss. When Katniss and Gail first walked in, Peeta had been watching a spring green bird hover in midair as it sips nectar from a large orange blossom. And remember, Katniss's favorite color is green, and Peeta's is orange. So the symbolism here, Peeta had been watching Katniss and Peeta as pawns in the rebel plot. So if Katniss is the green bird, she's nourished and sustained by Peeta, the orange flower. She is nourished by him. They need each other. I just realized this when I was prepping for this video, and I can't. Anyway, hummingbirds are aspirational here. There's something in nature that's more advanced than human-made technology. They're free to fly in all directions. Peeta's comment about wanting to make wings like theirs for Katniss so she would be fully free. Katniss and Prim are the hummingbirds, but Prim is the ultimate hummingbird. Peeta asks Katniss if she can shoot down a hummingbird, and she says she's never tried, not much meat on them, and Peeta agrees they're not very meaty and notes that Katniss doesn't kill for sport. Katniss is a fair, logical hunter/killer. Anytime she shoots, it's for self-defense and or survival. Hummingbirds would be difficult to shoot with a bow and arrow, and Gail suggests you could trap them using a fine mesh net and luring them in with nectar, and then snapping the net closed, causing the hummingbirds to flee further in to escape the noise. As Peeta says, playing on their natural instincts to flee danger. Thinking like your prey, that's where you find their vulnerabilities. I'd say this whole interaction is the seed that inspired Beetee and Gale's double bomb trap that killed Prim. It was designed to play on compassion as a vulnerability factor since it targets first responders and anyone who ran in to help those who were injured in the first blast. You could say, symbolically, Prim was the hummingbird. She was caught in the trap. She was lost. She went down the well. It's really interesting and sad that the hummingbirds were used to inspire such violence. Once the hummingbird conversation shifted to traps, Katniss suddenly wants to leave the hummingbird room before somebody starts setting up a snare. Very foreboding when we think of Prim as this hummingbird who got caught in the snare. And then Katniss steers the conversation to get Beetee to give her the new bow he'd made for her tool for survival and self-defense. When Katniss is shooting at an enemy, she's trying to stop them from getting close to her, versus Gale wants to draw them in and trap them. Just wait. Later in Mockingjay, Katniss and Finnick wait in the hummingbird room while the rescue mission for Peeta, Annie, and Joanna is happening. And remember, the three of them were all being held underground at the Capitol. Everyone's underground. Finnick and Katniss sat there anxiously making knots until their fingers were bleeding. Katniss perfects her miniature noose, and the hanging tree song is stuck in her head. Peeta the dead man had called out for his love to flee. They were supposed to meet at midnight at the tree in the arena. The Curse of Midnight. I have a whole video on it if you'd like to see. And this is where Katniss asks Finnick if he loved Annie right away, and he says no, she crept up on me. Which I'd say happened with Katniss and Peeta. Her feelings for him crept up on her among the chaos of her life. The next time we get dialogue after Finnick says that is when Haymitch walks in saying that everyone's back from the mission and they need to go to the hospital. And Katniss has to hold Finnick's hand and lead him out of the hummingbird room. He's in quite the state. I love their friendship so much. But the rescue mission ended up being a trap. The Capitol basically let 13 get their hostages since Peeta was programmed to take out Katniss. What do you think the hummingbirds are meant to symbolize in the story? Let me know in the comments. That about wraps things up. As always, thank you so much for watching, and if you haven't already, subscribe for more Hunger Games analyses and do the thumbs up thing.